Has to be a good one. All right, let's pray together. Lord, we're grateful for a beautiful day, and we do ask you to grant us with your grace and your wisdom as we discuss this bill. Pray that we'll be able to get through all the challenges associated with it and find something that'll really be good for all of Georgia, but particularly our friends in the rural areas that don't have great access to broadband. So we ask you to guide our time, help us to have clarity of understanding. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you, Chairman Cantor. That was a good prayer. Appreciate it. If we will, I think it will. I believe it will. We're going to stand at ease here for a few minutes, and if you will. While we're waiting, I don't think it'd be out of order to go ahead and give a little preview, I guess, of what the sub that we'll be working off will say. I'm going to have to kind of rely on Blake here to remind me some of these things. But the sub that we're going to be looking at when it gets here, and there's just a small correction being made to it currently, but it will be the bill that was brought to us yesterday by the senator with a few changes. The changes will include where there's language referring to PSC that has been changed to the with the recommendations that the senator came to us with yesterday, changing the PSC out, and with those changes he recommended. There is there is language in it that would restrict the EMCs and their service to what I believe is the original purpose of the bill anyway, and that would be to unserved areas. It would keep them within their territories unless they have an agreement with the adjacent EMC whose territory that they would want to do business in. I would think that the EMCs would want that, not wanting another EMC coming into their own to their territory to provide service. We've incorporated the language that we passed. We've incorporated language we passed, I think, a week and a half ago from House Bill. What was that bill number? 499 that Trey Kelly, Representative Kelly, brought to us. And is there anything else? I think that's it. So just a little preview while we're waiting for the actual document to come. 499 had to do with the right-of-way and
electric easements.
The easements, rather, yeah.
And I'm suspended state here for a second. Do you think we can get Senator Gooch to stand up and recite the Constitution backwards?
I don't think you do it forward.
Representative Jones, I know he could do it. There's no doubt about that, but we're not going to ask him to do it today.
times.
I got you.
That would definitely kill it.
That really kills it.
Representative Fraser, do you have a question?
Solid, man. That was solid.
Chairman, are we in a portion to ask you a question? Or are we just waiting to start the meeting?
Waiting right now.
So,
to ask me a question, you can.
yeah, thank you. You just went over the items that, the amendment items that came from the several different bills. Can you just restate that part again about the court system?
Well, I mean, we'll have to, but yes, and basically, in the bill that came over from the Senate, there were three areas that referred to the PSC, including disputes. I think would have gone to the PSC. There were a couple other areas, and the senator had asked that those be changed. I think you'd asked for all those to be changed away from the PSC, and those have been put into this sub that we're going to be taking up. And I think the senator made some. I mean, here again, it's going to be up to this committee to decide whether they want to go along with the sub that made those changes. But I think that the senator made some pretty good arguments yesterday why it needed to be changed. Yeah, I think you can ask the author of the bill when we get a bill here. But I'm hoping, we shouldn't have to be here very long. We're not going to take any testimony. If there's something, if a member of the committee has a question that needs to be addressed to someone who gave us testimony yesterday, we'll allow that if it can be handled fairly quickly. We'll do that. But I think there may be an amendment proposed, possibly. But I think that we probably can do this without taking up a whole lot of time, because I know people have other things to do. All right, appreciate your patience. I think the sub should be here any moment now. All right, we've got the subs here. We're going to give them out. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes. I'm not trying to rush because we're late, but I want to give members a little bit of time to look through but it is the same language as the bill that we had before us yesterday with those changes, and we'll go through that. Did you give? Did Gooch get a copy?
I gave away my copy. He only stopped. He only gave us two.
Huh?
He only gave us two.
Oh,
He was coming that way.
you gave the sponsor a copy, right? All right, if everybody take a look through here, in particular right now, I mean, I want everybody to, but I want the sponsor of the bill, Senator Gooch, to take a look through. I think he's pretty familiar with what what the changes are, but want to give him a chance to say anything he wants to about the bill. He presented it yesterday, but anything he wants to say about the bill or anything he has to say about any of the changes in this sub. Senator Gooch, by the way, got everything in this sub that he wanted and more, so. Representative Drenner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask one quick question. One of the issues that we were talking about yesterday was whether this was the dispute process was going to be resolved by the business court or the PSC, and I don't see that. Was that taken out?
And this sub would be resolved by court, yes.
Can you tell me where it is?
Well, I can't, but maybe Blake can help us.
Okay. Blake, can you tell me where it is?
Okay, we're gonna start on line 181. It's not the business court, because the business court, I don't believe, has been passed yet, so it's Superior Court. Y'all correct me if I'm wrong, please. But it's 181 to 220.
On line 87 and 88, I think this is new, right? We put this in the sub. We've defined an unserved area. An unserved area shall have the same meaning as provided for in Code Section 50-40-1, and that means that 20% or more do not have a 25 and 3, 25 down and 3 up.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. That's the definition of an unserved area. 95 through 115. This language here has to do with where the MC could provide the broadband service. And you can read it there, but to provide and operate broadband facilities or furnish on a non-discriminatory basis broadband services that are not retail broadband services, provided, however, that such broadband services shall only be provided in unserved areas, but may continue to be provided in such areas once the area becomes a served area. And provided further that such broadband services shall only be provided in the electric membership corporation's assigned area unless such broadband services are provided in another electric membership corporation's assigned area with written permission or an agreement between the two electric membership corporations. That's kind of what you're. 106 through 115. This is new.
Same thing.
Same thing. Okay. Now that has to do with the area that they would be operating in, and what else do we have here?
Still looking, Chairman. The Superior Court stuff, like I said, it's page 6 and
Okay.
7. I'm trying to find a grandfather clause. Polls are still mentioned on page 7 and 8,
Nothing has been changed as far as pole attachments.
except for the commission doesn't.
Right.
Here's your grandfather clause.
Okay. Line 248, and electric, this is a grandfather clause that allows those EMCs that have already gone into the business, and there are two, I understand, that have done that, an electric membership corporation or broadband affiliate that was providing and operating broadband facilities or offering broadband service prior to January 1st, 2019, shall be authorized to continue to provide and operate such broadband services and facilities in any assigned area in which it is currently providing and operating such broadband facilities, and to continue to offer such broadband services in any assigned area in which it is currently offering such broadband services.
That's Habersham and Blue Ridge.
And that's Habersham and Blue Ridge. It's according to Blake.
I think.
And section 4 is from that, I think it's House Bill 499, you say?
Yes, sir.
That we'd passed out of this committee just a couple of weeks ago.
I have a few copies.
Representative Jackson, I'm going to go ahead. Let me do this first. I'm not trying to keep you from asking a question, but I do want to give the senator the chance to address us. And I don't know if he has any objections to anything or not. I doubt that he does, but in case he does, we'll want to know that.
Was that a joke, or was that thank you, Chairman, and committee members, for another day to be in front of you to talk about an important piece of legislation. Obviously, I just saw the sub just as you have, and I haven't read through the entire bill yet, but I just want to make a couple comments about a served and unserved area, because this language looks very familiar to me, because it was in what we had last year that did not pass the Senate and the House in the final hours of sine die, but it did have that language in it, and we were trying to resolve a few issues, and those were some compromises that we came up with. So the problem for the served and unserved areas, when you say 20% of a served area, who's going to measure that area? Is it defined in the bill that it's a census tract or a census block? Is it a jurisdiction like a city or a county? Who's going to measure that 20%? Does someone have to physically go house to house, business to business, and do an inventory? Or are we going to rely strictly on the FCC maps, which we all know now are bogus maps? It's very inaccurate data. We've had a pilot project being held over at DCA this year that we've all funded in our budget that shows 3 counties that have been chosen. They're rural counties in North, Central, and South Georgia, and those maps are totally wrong. And so if we go into this knowing that, then is it going to favor the EMCs or is it going to favor the cable companies? I'm looking in the room and I don't even see a lobbyist here from Windstream. So if he was sitting in the building across the street when I came over here, so he obviously is not too concerned about the bill. And I say that because you were grandfathering the North Georgia Network in, which I was a part of creating when I was a county commissioner back in 2004. So the North Georgia Network services areas outside the Blue Ridge EMC footprint and the Habersham EMC footprint. It comes up from Atlanta through Forsyth, Dawson, Lumpkin, White. It goes over into Habersham counties up to Towns, Union, Fannin, and it stretches out back toward the east, toward Athens, and even has partnerships now out of state. And so what does this impact do to them? So I think there's obviously still more work to be done on the bill. I'd love to get it out of this committee and get it to the floor and get it to a conference committee and continue to work on it. I wouldn't sit here and ask you to vote against this bill today. If we had another sub that we could offer up, I'd rather go with that direction. But I can tell you the idea of telling a company you can only sell your product to certain customers that doesn't currently have it today goes against every principle in my body as a Republican and as an American. And I would think that you would think the same thing. Why do we want to pick whose company is going to sell a product? I guess you could say the same argument is being fought across the street on CON. You know, whether a cancer center should be able to provide services to a person with cancer or not. So we may not solve this issue today, but I really have philosophical problems with telling a private company who they can and cannot sell their product to. Representative Stover, you said yesterday that 100 feet across the street from your house was an AT&T line that you couldn't get access to. Well, wouldn't it be a shame that if the EMCs had a fiber optic cable across the street and they said, I'm sorry, your area is already served, so we can't sell broadband to you? It'd be hard to explain that to the business community back home. So I think passing this bill today may be smart to keep it moving, but I don't think it's a bill that I would like to see the governor put his signature to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There may be questions I don't know if you want to answer, if you want to respond. Representative Jones has a question.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator. I'm confused or have concern about the dispute resolution process.
Sure.
In the LC we looked at yesterday, 3843S, the language talks about the commission, the PSC commission being the dispute resolution entity for any complaints or concerns that are raised. So my question then is, if a dispute resolution or complaint occurs and we're leaving that to the superior courts to resolve, is it not true that the consumer must then hire a lawyer and go through the process of filing a legal complaint versus the PSC resolution process, which is already set up with an 800 hotline and is already currently staffed with the folks who have the ability to resolve these disputes? Am I misunderstanding something in terms of a change of dispute resolution?
Your argument is partially correct on one side of it. The other side of it is a corporation such as some of the entities that are represented in this room who already have enough lawyers to fill half of this building would already be doing that and already being paid to fight those fights regardless of where those venues are. So we could put that venue at the PSC, we could put it downtown Atlanta, or we could put it down in your district, which is down on the coast, I believe. And, you know, the point is the PSC is often advocated and lobbied by people in this room as well that are paid to lobby them. I don't think a Superior Court judge is. A Superior Court judge is going to come down strictly on the rule of law, and they're going to hire professionals, whether they be CPAs or if they're former utility providers. They're going to use the resources, and yes, those are paid for most often by taxpayers. But if it's a big enough of a challenge and big enough of an issue, then it ought to be taken seriously. And I think a Superior Court judge can handle that just as easily about a case like this as he does a custody case about what's in the best interest of a 4-year-old child or a sexual case. You know, I just think that Superior Courts are capable. I think the PSC could be capable. I'm not going to say they're not. I think they're going to need more resources to be ready for those cases. A Superior Court judge doesn't have to have that staff on hand until that case is filed in his courtroom, and that's when he would have to react to that. And I think some of your lawyers in the room could probably talk more about that process than I could. The business court, I believe, would be a good venue, although it's not approved yet. I hope it will be in the next 2 weeks. And in the near future, that would be a possible venue. So I'm not going to lose sleep over it either way, but I think having it closest to the home, if you're a customer and you want to file a complaint against your local EMC, then you do it in your hometown instead of driving to Atlanta. And I understand you can file some complaints on the website, but I can tell you from past experience, all of you are elected in this building, just like I am. Have you ever had an email from a constituent back home that said, my email doesn't work? I contacted the PSC and their response was, we do not regulate the internet. You must contact your legislator. Anybody ever had that experience besides me? Thank you. There's a lot of them. So right now the PSC has nothing to work with. They have no laws on the books that would allow them to make any decisions on this topic. Now, this bill could lead in that direction, but I would say if we're going to do that, let's put everybody under that tent together, and let's start to make sure everybody plays by the same rules. And I would be happy with that. If every provider followed the same rules, as we often talk about a level playing field, then I believe that would be the fairest approach of all.
Then that leads to my brief follow-up question, if I might, Mr. Chairman. So, very brief. So what happens if we have two superior courts in different parts of the state that come up with different rulings and decisions about complaints or issues? Where is the statewide control over deciding what's right and what's not?
Well, there's always the appeals process. I imagine you could appeal the decision of a Superior Court judge. I would argue, not that I've ever been before the PSC, but I would argue that you may have two different outcomes based on the PSC members that are in office at the same time. I've talked to multiple members of the PSC, and none of them have the same position on this bill, and so I'm not sure they want it either. I know one particularly is very vocal that they do not want this to come to their commission. They would rather see us deal with this in the business court or the Superior Court venue. So I think it depends on who you ask. What's the outcome? I couldn't tell you. I think every complaint and every case would be different.
Thanks.
Good
Senator
question.
Gooch. Any other questions for Senator Gooch? Okay, Representative Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. Senator, I agree with you. We haven't had enough time to look over this bill. And so I'm not going to try to ask you some questions on a bill we just received. But
Representative, I just want to remind you, whoa, hold on. The chair has, you had, this is, as I said, this is basically the same bill that you had yesterday. This is the bill that came over from the Senate some time ago. You've had time. Now, as far as this particular sub, I've given you time, but now I'm not saying you have to vote on it right now, but please don't say you haven't had. That's something I just don't like to hear, that we haven't had time to review something, because we really have. And with that, you may proceed.
Disagreeing with Senator Gooch. That's all I did.
Go ahead.
So if I may continue. So on line 192, Senator, there's language for the first time that I witnessed. It states, no such action shall be filed as a class action. And that's not in the bill that I've seen previously. So do we know why that particular sentence was added?
It wouldn't be fair to me to answer at that point, because I didn't put the language in this particular amendment. So,
all right. If I'm, all right. If I may continue. On lines 217 to 220, it talks about reimbursing the judges. Do we have any estimates on what that cost may look like? Possible costs?
If I'm not mistaken, no one's ever done this in Georgia before. I'm not sure they've done it anywhere outside of Georgia. Whatever it costs to try a case in a Superior Court, it could be very minimal, or it could be very expensive. I guess the gentleman to your left would have a better feeling for that than I would. I've never tried a case in court, but I've paid a lot of lawyers over the years, and they're all overpaid, in my opinion. So,
once again, I agree with you,
offense,
Senator.
Barry.
And that's not in this bill. I agree with you. If I may continue,
And then,
Chair.
with the exception of Chairman Powell over here, he's not overpaid.
So I noticed that we continue to talk about how Senate Bill 2 possibly could regulate the internet. And I just do not see that language about regulating the internet. And I know it was mentioned in your presentation and others. I'm just trying to make sure that we're not doing something that could be adversely impactful.
So I think I've mentioned several times the words that putting the nose under the tent. I don't believe the internet industry as a whole wants the PSC or any other regulatory agency to have control over things like rates and territories and complaints. But I believe when you start going in that direction, which you would with this bill, once the EMCs are under that regulatory oversight with cross-subsidization and served versus unserved areas, then I believe it's going to drag more conversations in that direction, which I would consider supporting at this point in time to try to once and for all solve the problems that we have with rural broadband. And the biggest issue we hear is the fact that the rate of return is not attractive to a for-profit corporation whose members are basically executives and whose board members are on corporate boards from Wall Street making millions of dollars a year, compared to the option here that we would provide a local board of EMC members back home who are elected just like you and I are elected, but they would be elected by their local electorate membership members. They would make the decisions, not on a profit basis, but on providing a quality service and a quality product and an effective and affordable competitive price for internet service to those rural areas of the state. So I think it would be the argument that we have so many times, let's create a level playing field. Let's quit picking winners and losers. We argue about that a lot here. And to tell one company in Georgia, you can only serve and sell a product that no one else wants to sell a product to. That's the only product that you can sell, and that's the only target that you can use, and that's the only customer that you can go after, versus everybody else in the free world can come into Georgia and sell the internet service without even a document from the legislature and without a document from a regulatory agency. Anybody else in the country can come here and sell the internet, but if you're an EMC, you can't do it unless you do A, B, C, all the way to Z. And the first and foremost restriction is you can only sell it to people who can't get it by one of these other for-profit companies. And so where's the level playing field in that argument? You have to look at this and say, who are we trying to protect? Are we trying to protect our citizens? Or are we trying to protect the stockholders of a for-profit company that's based in New York City or in Washington or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania?
My last question, Chair, and I want to pick up where Representative Jones left off, and that is around the dispute piece and PSC. I'm really, in the last 24 hours, just been really trying to wrap my head around why we're removing language around the commission. And I went and, just for my own education, went and said, okay, what is it that the PSC is delivering today in the state of Georgia? And they have a plethora of things, and it just makes sense that if PSC is already resolving disputes between telecommunication carriers, they're resolving territorial disputes between EMC, Georgia Power, and other municipality-owned electric companies. They approve finance agreements for EMCs. It just seemed like they are subject matter experts when it comes down to, in terms of I'm just talking about the utilities industry. And so I just thought it would be prudent for us to have PSC to be part of Senate Bill 2 versus to remove them and take this now. The courts are already overburdened. And so And so now they have to go out and get outsourced and get consultants and more lawyers. So I'm just trying to figure out, why are we setting ourselves up to get things wrapped up in the court system when we already have an able entity that are managing this industry each and every day?
So I'm not going to die over this fight. My goal in this 3-year process has been to do something substantial and significant for the lives of the people that live in our state. In this situation, it's pertaining to the lack of dependable and affordable broadband. And so if it's the will of this committee and the House and the Senate to put it in the PSC, and we can move forward and make those people's lives better, then I consider that a victory, Representative. But let's treat them all the same. So if we can drag one into the PSC, let's drag them all in there, and let's have hearings and let's talk about it. So, you know, the question we should be asking, maybe not here today, but the question we should be asking is of the other providers in the state, why haven't you already serviced these people? Why do you only go into a small downtown area where there's 500 apartments being built? After 30 years of being in the business, you wait until now to go, and you only run service to that 1 mile radius of that apartment complex or that strip center or that outlet mall, and then you leave town. You don't take care of the rest of the community. They left the rest of the communities with whatever the provider has a telephone service. In this case, 2 to 3 megabits per second. 20 years ago, that was adequate. Today, it's not. So who's going to come back and backfill those voids? Who's going to backfill those dirt roads in South Georgia when there's only 2 or 3 houses to a mile? They don't want to do it, and I understand that, because there's not a return on that investment. They don't want to spend their millions of dollars that they've made in an area where there's no return. But the EMCs, that's what they're here for. They're here to provide that service. So let's level the playing field. If you want to put them in the PSC, let's put them all there. If you want to put them in the Superior Court, last time I checked, that's where you go to sue somebody. Representative Fleming, when you file a lawsuit against a corporation, do you file it in Fulton County or do you file it in the home of that corporation? I believe primarily you do it where their headquarters is located, if I'm not mistaken.
Thank you,
So
sir.
that's the way we're treating this legislation, no different than any other corporation in Georgia. And so, again, let's pass the bill, make it as good as we can make it for their citizens.
Thank you, Senator Gooch. You have, if you care to take them, we have a couple more questions
I'll be
here.
here all day if you
Okay.
choose.
Who was next here? Representative Jones.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'd like to call the question.
You're not recognized for that, but thank you for your effort.
Mr. Chair, can I be recognized for a motion?
You may be. We have some more business to conduct. Number 8. Who was number 8?
Representative Meeks.
Representative Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator, thank you for your tremendous work on this. As a resident of rural Georgia and one who ran across a district that is partially served by internet service, thank you for your dedication and what we are trying to do here, obviously as a result of the Rural Development Council efforts as well. My only thing is simply that at the end of the day, when we stand on the stage and say, you know what, our ultimate mission is to make sure we get broadband to everyone, and obviously you're the more expert on the issue here. I just want to make sure that at the end of the day, in 2 years from now, we can look back and say, this legislative language is what we actually needed, and it did what it was intended to do. So thank you for your great work.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you, Representative Meeks. I think Representative Martin, if you want to get a mic there.
Hi, Senator. Mr. Chairman, I apologize. We had a higher ed meeting, so I was over there chairing that. Quick question about this. The idea in this bill is so that if an EMC wants to get in the business of broadband, they have to bifurcate it so they can't use monies made from their members to provide broadband. Is that not true?
That is in the bill, yes.
So they can't do it. So just as a practical matter, to the representative just before me asked,
because isn't it true, earlier you said right now, if Gooch and Martin want to come in and form Gooch and Martin Cable, we could come into Georgia and start delivering cable TV.
Today.
And we'd have to do our own pole attachment agreements with folks, but we could do it today. Is that true?
Internet service. I'm not,
And
about,
I'm
I'm
sorry,
not sure about cable TV.
internet, broadband,
Right.
lowercase. So my question is, the EMCs could form XYZ and do that today as a group of board members and people. Sorry, if they're doing it as an affiliate and they can't cross-subsidize, where's the startup money coming from?
Well, where did you get your startup money in your first business?
Well, I'm not an EMC and I'm not
Okay,
regular.
so-
I'm not under the laws of the EMC. It's a
Okay,
serious question.
no, it's a good
How are
question.
we helping
So
them?
let's talk about that a little bit. You could apply for loans, which we know, speaking to Secretary Perdue, that the loan applications are going to be due April or May of this year. There's $650 million that's being pushed down from the feds, plus another $1.5 billion that I think is in the Farm Bill. So there's two big sources of revenue.
Okay.
And let me.
I'm with you. You've answered my
Can I-
question. I'm for you. I'm not trying to trick you on this, Senator.
I understand.
And
I wanna
I know
go-
the chairman's ready to go. So, all right, so there is a place for them to get the money. That's what I want.
There's a place for some of them if they choose, or they could get loans.
Absolutely.
You
So,
know?
so
Sure.
my question is, and this is a serious question. I'm not trying to block the bill. I understand what you're trying, but my question is, what's prohibiting people in these communities from getting in the broadband business today, a similar board of directors that would be with XYZ EMC? What's prohibiting them? Do they have to be, and this is a constructive question, do they have to be EMCs in order to get access to that money? That's where I was trying to go. Is there something that these folks can get access to that money if we pass this bill, but if we don't pass this legislation enabling them to do that, they don't have access to it? That's the serious question I was trying to get
The
at.
answer is if we do not pass this legislation, the EMCs will not qualify for the grants according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue. He has told us time after time, we must pass this legislation to statutorily authorize the EMCs to be able to get into the business.
Okay,
So,
that
yes.
is my question, Mr. Chairman. So they could, three guys do broadband in a rural area could apply for this, but they wouldn't have the business infrastructure out there to do it. So that's again, it's a constructive line of questioning. They're going to get their money, but the reason to do this is they have sort of a business and know the lay of the land, if you will. And we're trying to create this statutory authority for them to do it within reasonable limits, so they have access to that money. That was what I was trying to get at, Mr. Chairman.
You've nailed it.
Okay, thank you.
And there are small companies doing what we're talking about doing. There are small business entrepreneurs all over the country, even here in North Georgia, that are trying to do it. But the entry to market is very expensive, as you all know, and it's difficult. And so we don't know out of the 41 EMCs if you'll have 1, 5, or 41 of them to do it over time. But I know in other states that have authorized them, they're doing very well at it. And so I think Georgia could as well.
Thanks, Senator. You have a question from Representative Jones. You had your light on. I'm gonna go to Chairman Fleming here first, and the only reason is because he's sitting right in front of me. That's the only reason. That's the only reason. Chairman Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator, what did the original Senate Bill 2 do when it came out of the Senate, and what does this bill do now that's different as a sub?
I would say the biggest difference at this point, Representative, is the venue change, which is, I think, more favorable. So it takes it back to Superior Court to where it was in the PSC. But the unfavorable change that we see here before us is that it limits the EMCs to only serving unserved areas, which by definition, referenced in this bill, would be when 20% or more of the, I don't know if you call them residents or the people in a area, which you're saying was a census block, are unserved. By definition of less than 25 megabits down and 3 up. The difficulty in that, as I said earlier, was measuring what is 20% look like. Do you go door to door, Or do you just send a letter to your local providers and say, give us a map of your service area? If you do that, then it's not accurate. If you look at the FCC maps, they're not accurate. We know that by the tests that we've done, the pilot projects. The lady sitting here behind me, Deanna Perry, is now the executive director of the Georgia Broadband Program under DCA that we created last year under SB 402. She is being paid money from our general Treasury to put these plans into place and to look at these maps, and she can testify that these maps are not accurate. They're not going to be good information. Until we get better mapping and until we appropriate the funds to do that, I can't tell you where the unserved and served areas are unless I get out and go door to door at these homes. But I can tell you where they are in my district. They're just about everywhere outside of a city proper.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. It looks like you have another question. That's Representative Jones.
Mr. Chair.
I'm not recognizing you, but I'm asking, do you
Can
have
I
a question?
follow up one more thing? The third thing in the bill that I think is very important, and that is the inability in the way the wording is now is the inability of the EMCs to use their existing fiber. They have dark fiber today and lit fiber that they use for their operations, and they need to have that capability. To take this use away from them cripples their operations today. These are unintended consequences that you don't hear about when you're asked to vote for these kind of bills until you're 2 days later and you're like, what did we do? To take that restriction and put on them, in my opinion, they would probably tell you don't even pass the bill if you're going to do that to them. You're talking about all 41 of the EMCs that are connected through networks and through fiber optic lines around the state today. We want to help push those fiber optic cables out and to help partner with these other internet providers. They can use that dark fiber, they can use that lit fiber, and they can sell that capacity to these other providers. Don't tie their hands behind their back by doing that. That is, in my opinion, that's a terrible amendment, and we need to really think about that before we pass this into final passage.
I believe that was in your original sub. Is that correct? What he's wanting? I think that's in the. I think what you're wanting is actually
if
in the
his
sub.
original sub is still in place,
That's
we're
in place.
good.
Yes.
But based on what you said earlier, if you took that out, then we have a problem. So.
I would have to.
And I think you should confirm that with the EMCs in the room if possible. But that was in the, Representative Fleming, that was in our bill that came out of the Senate. We were unable to strip that in committee, so.
Senator, I believe the language you wanted is still in there. However,
Okay.
with the served and unserved, when we put that restriction in there, I think they did change that part. But
Okay.
that just relates to that. Representative Jones, you had a question, I believe. Is that right?
Mr. Chair, I'm a little confused here.
Okay.
Representative Dickey had a sub.
Yes, he had a sub, but we're not working for that sub.
Okay, we're working for what we have before us.
Yeah, you're working for what
Okay.
you have before you.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I would have preferred to have had the PSC remain in it, but it's not there. But I do think the bill is too important, and for the greater good, I'd like to make a motion to pass.
We have a motion, do pass. Is there a second? We have a motion, do pass, and a second. Any discussion? Representative Frazier, you have,
I actually had a question before you got to the motion.
well, go ahead and
For the author of the bill.
Pass it.
Beg your pardon?
I had a question for Senator Gooch.
You can ask it in form of discussion if you'd like.
Thank you. Senator Gooch, again, thank you for this. I'm in rural Georgia, and I am just trying to, I talked with you last week, and we talked about the timeline when possibly I can get some of my folk to have these services way out in the rural area. So I have Burke County, and I still got about 600 plus miles that need these services. And I met with some of these folk on Saturday that I shared with you about. And you gave me that magic number of 5 to 7 years, possibly in the near future. So I don't even see the word rural in this bill anymore. We started out 3 years about expanding rural broadband. Now it's just broadband for everybody. But I'm still concerned about my folk that I talk to that's looking forward to having these services. My question is this 20% of underserved or unserved constituency in the state, where did that 20% number come from, this magic number of 20%? And then my same question to you again, what is the timeline? Because you've already explained that you don't know how this number came about and how we're going to come to this 20%. What is the timeline again for my folk to be able to have broadband in this century?
Before we leave this place, let me ask you a question, Representative. Can you tell me who your internet provider is in that county today? Do you have one or
I have
more?
Comcast.
Okay. So the first question I would ask Comcast is, when are they going to fix it? What's their plans? What's their build-out plans look like? Before you ask someone else to come in and provide a service, I'm not asking people to run Comcast off. But I can tell you today that private companies are making money. If you look on the internet, you can find the filings where they've made billions of dollars each year. And so let's ask these private companies first to come into our communities and help fix the problem. That's what I asked Windstream to do. 5, 6 years ago, I met the president and CEO of the company. He flew here from Little Rock, Arkansas, and I met with him here in Atlanta. And he promised me then he would try to make things better, and they have made improvements. But we can't stop there. We can't stop with the promise. We've got to continue to put pressure on these providers. Doesn't matter if they're a profit or for-profit or non-for-profit. But if they're not going to come and expand and upgrade the facilities, then somebody else should be allowed to. And if your EMC back home is that group of men and women that you know and that you go to church with and you believe in, they live on Main Street, not Wall Street. If they're willing to put up the money and they're willing to apply for the grants to help you and your neighbors, the people on Wall Street don't want to do it. Let's pass this bill to allow them to do it. Let the EMCs take a stab at it. Now, out of the 41 EMCs, I haven't had a conversation with any of them directly on when or if they would do this. But I know that 2 have, and I was part of that creation 12 years ago. And they have been very successful, but they have a lot of work left to do. And I know that they can do it, but it's going to take billions of dollars. This issue is not going to be solved overnight. I can't tell you what day of the week it's going to start or finish. But if we don't start, we're never going to finish.
Thank you, Senator Gooch. One final question, Mr. Chairman, really quickly. I have a lot of things to say about my service provider, Comcast, because they are there. The problem that we're having out in the rural area is, when we initially started this bill, was we needed to have affiliate, someone that we could partner with as it relates to the funding process. So in the rural areas, we don't have affiliates, big affiliates like they have here in the metro area to partner with to expand broadband. So I'm just trying to find out, what is Senate Bill 2 going to do to help me in the rural areas, either find affiliates or find someone to help us with the funding?
Okay. So when you said Comcast was your provider, I assumed that they were covering the entire county, but maybe that's not true, because I've never heard a complaint on Comcast service. All of the Comcast customers that I've spoken to were satisfied. They usually use a cable or a fiber optic platform. They're not using copper. The smaller telephone companies and the big companies, even like Windstream, most of their service is provided off of a copper line, and that's where your problems are occurring with low speeds in the internet, and the fact that it comes and goes, it's off a lot and it's on a lot. Those are some of the complaints that you may be hearing from. This bill only addresses one option, that is to allow the EMCs in Georgia to participate if they so choose. Doesn't require it, and it doesn't incentivize them. There's no tax credits in the bill. There's no grants in this bill. It simply gives them statutory authority to begin the process to look and see if there's something they wish to do or not. I can't answer for them. They're in the room. They would be better at that if you would ask those questions to them.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Representative Frazier, for your questions. There's one more. We're going to take one more. Now, this is discussion at this point, not asking any more questions. I had missed Representative Frazier, so I'd let that happen. Senator, if you can either stand there or sit down.
I'll be happy to sit down.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I really do appreciate y'all doing this, and if you'll pass this bill, I think it's the right thing to do, and it's very personal to a lot of us, and I think it's a good piece of legislation, even though it needs a little work.
Thank you, Senator, for all your hard work and your great presentation on it. We appreciate it very, very much. Representative Drenner, did you have something to add in discussion?
No, excuse me, I did, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I wanted to thank Senator Gooch. I live in the metropolitan area, and I love my service provider, AT&T. I love my fiber optic service, and I'm going to vote for the bill. I, however, have some concerns about lines 84 through 88 on the territorial restrictions that are defined in the service areas and unserved areas.
Thank you, Representative Drenner. That actually, the language that you're addressing comes directly from the bill we passed last year, the broadband bill we passed last year. 499 or whatever that was. That's where that actually comes from. We have a motion. We have a second. We're now through with discussion, except that I want to again thank the Senator for the hard work he's done on this. And, we need to go ahead and get this passed, get it moving, because there's just too much at stake. There's too many people that need help out there, and we could argue this from here on to kingdom come, I guess. But the thing is, those people are tired of waiting. They don't want to wait till kingdom come. There's people out there that need their broadband service. So we need to move it on. The Senator has agreed. He wants to move the bill on, wants it to pass. And with that, I see no further discussion. All in favor of this measure indicate by saying aye. This is Senate Bill 2. Is this it?
Yes, sir.
LC 364011 ERS. All in favor indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed by saying no? No. Okay, the measure carries and is eligible to go on the rules. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned.